Engaged visioning and planning.
That's yours? Okay. All right. Just want to make sure you sit in front of me.
Thank you. Yeah, I would find mine.
Okay. Linda, you're next to me.
Okay.
Justice. Meeting. Okay. So you don't have to worry about it. Nice. Oh, nice. Are all the mics on? Yes. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So today, this panel is about community engagement in outdoor recreation planning. To open it up, I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience, my first experience in Laramie a couple years ago when I came here to work with many of the folks in this room on the Pilot Hill project, of which many of you are familiar. So in that project, which the deliverable of that was a land use plan, but more importantly, it was a community engagement process to get the community together to figure out what the vision was for that beautiful property that you can see, all around town. So we worked with, and I don't want to steal Sarah Brown Matthews' thunder because she has a lot to talk about the Pilot Hill project today as well, but a really important part of that project was designing a community engagement process that was going to be meaningful through all parts of it. So, there was a lot of context about the history of that property. There were a lot of land managers, and there was a lot of different desires from the public about what they wanted for it. So we worked together to think about how do we design a process that brings everyone together, manages the expectations, but also sets the stage for future fundraising, development, and implementation so that the Pilot Hill project and the property can really be successful, decades into the future with all the trails that you're seeing developing today. And so that was a really big undertaking. And, we'll talk a little bit about that today, but in a lot of the work that I do as a community planner that often involves recreation projects, is that we have in the cycle of planning, I think about, the visioning stage, the planning stage, and the implementation stage. And community engagement is such an essential part of all of those processes. Not only do you want to get the right people in the room and really have diverse voices at the table to create a vision that is meaningful across the board for whatever your project is, but in the planning stage, you also want to have transparency. So if you get feedback, you want to say, oh, did we incorporate that feedback? If so, why? And if we didn't, why not? So you want to be really transparent about why your final plan product and your recommendations and your actions, why they are the way they are and how you came up with those along the way based on your community engagement process. And that really sets the foundation of trust for implementation so that when you go to build your first project, you say, 80% of people thought this was the highest priority trailhead location. And you say that, we have all the community engagement to back that up. And in our plan, this was our community engagement process. Therefore, we should get this grant to then build all of these new trails. So the community engagement process is such an important part of the planning process. And I've brought this, we have this great panel here today who have a really diverse set of experiences in tourism, outdoor recreation, and community engagement. And we're going to talk about all of these different parts of community engagement and planning. So in lieu of introductions, I'm going to ask an opening question that gives the panel members a chance to introduce themselves. So my first question is, what is your role in the community engagement process in the work that you do? And I'll have you start.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Linda Merigliano, and I'm here from the Bridger-Teton National Forest. And I know Jackson isn't always seen as part of Wyoming, but it is a really fun place to work. I've been working there on the Bridger-Teton for 32 years, and recreation is super important in Jackson, and it's every kind of recreation and things. So the thing that has kept me there is it is very much home. I actually live in Idaho, which is almost where all of our workforce lives, and things. But I've always worked in Wyoming. And one of the things that has been apparent over the years is it's a really intense landscape, and with really distinct seasons. And because of that, people play really hard, they work really hard, and they debate really hard, and lots of intense feelings about it. But it's a small enough place where people wear lots of hats, and it's a small enough community where people know each other, and it's also a place where people care passionately about public lands. And that is an environment I've always loved to work in. I'd much rather work in that kind of an environment where, people can strongly disagree, but they're not apathetic. And so, over the years, we have worked to really, really build relationships among a lot of different constituencies. I've worked on wilderness plans, a lot of non-motorized trail system plans near the community, of developing kind of community trail plans, motorized trail systems, river plans, a lot during the pandemic of dealing with dispersed camping and the explosion of use in that arena and things. So look forward to the questions and things. But I think that ultimately what the role that we've been trying to create is, how do we create an environment where the operating norm is one of respect and responsibility and reciprocity and things. And I think we're getting there. And it's been a long journey, but that's something I'd love to explore today.
Great, thank you. Lauren?
Hey, morning, everybody. My name is Lauren Hazzard. My pronouns are they, them. I'm an outdoor recreation planner for the Bureau of Land Management out of the Rock Springs field office. I have a lot less seniority than everyone else on this panel, but I have some cool projects going on right now that are in the midst of the community engagement process. So I'm hoping I can offer some insight to you guys on what that BLM process looks like. In short, my job is engaging with the community to find out what recreational activities, what outcomes, what experiences people want to be having on their public lands, and then creating the recreational setting characteristics that are necessary for people to achieve those outcomes. In the BLM, we call this outcomes-focused management, and it's working backwards from that desired outcome to provide those settings. Those outcomes are split into 4 benefit categories. There's the individual benefits. These are things like improved mental health, improved physical health, greater sense of self-worth and skills. There's the social benefits, whether you're looking for an experience of great solitude, looking to become closer with your family, feel like you're a part of a recreational community. There's the economic benefits to the individual who's profiting from that recreational activity and the community at large. And there are the environmental benefits. These are things like helping people become better stewards of their public lands, take a greater appreciation in the natural resources that they have in their local environments. So really, I spend my day-to-day trying to engage with my community and find out what benefits they're looking to see, and then providing those recreational setting characteristics, the facilities on the ground, to give people the chance to have the recreational experiences that they want to. And in Wyoming, we all know we're very blessed to have the amount of public land that we do. In my field office alone, we have over 3.6 million surface acres. And we're trying to catch up with providing the facilities for all of these different recreational experiences to happen without conflict. So that's my role, is providing the opportunity for people to have these experiences they're looking for.
Thank you. Amy?
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Amy Crawford, and I work for Wyoming State Parks in a division called the Wyoming Office of Outdoor Recreation. And I know all of you in this room have really great jobs, but I've got the best because I get to go to communities and talk to them about what they want to see as far as recreation goes. We convene 7 outdoor recreation collaboratives in Wyoming, with the 8th on its way. And these are a group of stakeholders and advisors and business owners that come together to talk about what they'd like to see in and right outside their community. So it's really, really fun. And I'd like to, if I can, just ask anyone who is currently serving on one of our outdoor recreation collaboratives in this room who happens to be here to raise your hand. Raise them high. Yeah, so this is great. So there's about 150 people right now that are involved in our collaboratives across the state. So it's a great opportunity for us to really get to know people and develop those relationships that it takes. So thank you. And I hope I can see all of you who raised your hands tomorrow as well. So
thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Brown Matthews. I'm a Laramie girl, and I am the executive director at the pleasure of the Pilot Hill Inc. Board of Directors for the Pilot Hill Recreation and Wildlife Habitat Management Area. I believe my job as far as a community convener is really to think about the unique nature of Pilot Hill and how that impacts our ability to really gather information to help us not only develop the area, but to manage it. Pilot Hill isn't a state park. We're not a city park. We're not a county open space. We're this unusual blend of entities that have come together with a visionary purpose that helps us steer the project. So as I think about community engagement, I think my real role is to figure out how do we have dialogue around what the vision is for the community rather than debate? And how do we make sure that we're including the entities and the voices that may not be the loudest in conversations? So we'll get into that further today, but I appreciate your time and your attention this morning.
Good morning. My name is Erik Dombroski. I'm the chair for the Jacksonville Travel and Tourism Board. You'd be asking why we have someone from the hospitality industry up, but it's a great panel of outdoor recreation. But about 5 years ago, in 2018, the Travel and Tourism Board decided to take a shift in our approach to move forward. We shifted from a true marketing organization into a destination management organization. We partnered with the George Washington University and Sustainable Consortium on a program to put together a sustainable destination management plan. We were trying to start it in 2018. We decided to take a pause during the pandemic, and we started it full up in 2021. And we were excited to launch the plan in January and adopt it and how we move forward. I think the things that I took the most out of that process was our engagement with the community and how we moved forward. We were very separated on how we moved, connected with the community, and we were sitting in our own islands. And during this process, we were able to engage with over 5,000 community members in the process through surveys, independent studies, focus groups, meeting with stakeholders, and partnered with different organizations throughout our community, as you mentioned, to help us get less represented voices to come in from the Latino community with 122, working with federal, working with state parks, working with national lands. It's the first time I would say in Teton County, we have everyone at the table talking together and how we can plan really a 5-year plan to move forward in our destination. The 3 really focus points for us is economy, natural resources, and our community. And outdoor recreation, in my opinion, impacts all 3 of those buckets. So for us to be able to get all of the community members on the table, not in a place where we're going to necessarily have everyone agreeing, but at least having everyone discussing where they see the optimal target for us 5 years from now, will let us be able to help fund, help manage, help develop, and work towards a more robust outdoor recreation economy within Teton County that really supports the local community and takes care of everyone in the area. So that's how I think we're connected in there, and we'd like to engage with the community.
So Erik, I want to stay on you for this next question because I think it's really related to the work that you do, is that we've all seen this shift in the last couple of years from outdoor recreation encouragement as like an engine for local economic development. And, you know, we build it and they will come and they'll spend money in our downtowns and everyone's going to win, to, oh my God, there are so many people. How do we deal with all the people? And so I'm kind of curious, from all these different roles that you have, how has this shift impacted your work? And if applicable, how has it affected the community conversations and in community engagement events that you're involved with?
Sure, it's an excellent question. For us, having both the national parks, the national parks in our backyard, there's really no way for us to slow down visitation. It's everyone's land. We want everyone to come. So for us, management has been the key. We were very fortunate with the lodging tax going to a statewide lodging tax. Prior to that, we were only allowed to use our funds for marketing. From this point forward, we can use it for management. We can use it for education, for community grants. We did a partnership with Friends of Bridger Teton last year. We were able to allocate $1 million to them to help fund what they were doing in the national forest and in the lands there. What we heard during the STMP process is that there were a lot of voices, as Linda mentioned. Everyone's very passionate about what they do, climbing, biking, raft, whatever you're doing, and they all have their special places and their special spots. And I would say lack of engagement was not our concern. It was managing the expectations and ensuring that everyone's voice was heard as we move forward. So for us, it's trying to find a plan to move forward where we know we're not going to be able to tell someone, sorry, you can't come. But how can we allow the visitors coming into our area and the locals to prepare better when are certain times, working with the national, even the Grand Teton National Park, to put out messaging about times to go around Jenny Lake to spread people out throughout the day, which has made a noticeable difference. So we've shifted our messaging from marketing into management to help ensure people are ready and planned and prepared when they come to Teton County and the greater Yellowstone area. So they are aware of what to do, they have a better experience, and they actually provide less impact. And we've noticed that from 2022 or 2021 summer, which was out of control, almost impossible to manage, to 2022, it's been a noticeable difference. And part of that is we stay engaged with the community and we continuously get feedback from them. And we put some KPIs and indicators in place from sentiment from our residents and how they're feeling that it's being impacted. And we're excited to announce soon with University of Wyoming to put together really a dashboard so we can track these items and have a tangible data for people to look at and be able to react. And we can change our plan of attack within the community based on that feedback and what we're getting from the sentiment from the residents.
Great. Does anyone else who wants to answer that question next? Amy, do you have any experience? Like, how has your job shifted in the last couple of years with recreation management?
Well, our office is relatively new. So Patrick used an analogy yesterday that we're kind of flying the plane as we build it, building the plane as we fly it. And both of those, we're doing both of those actually. You know, we're learning as we go. We don't know what we don't know. And it's been real great to get into the community and meet people and really start to build relationships. I think that's a key in anything outdoor recreation, is to build those relationships.
Are some of the asks in your regional collaboratives, are they asking for tools to help them manage tourism rather than encourage it, or like trail counters, or, you know, making trailheads a little bit more bulletproof? Like, what kinds of management asks and conversations are happening?
We see a huge variety, and it's interesting that we have 7 collaboratives and they're all so different, what people need. But really what we want to do is connect people with resources to get projects done. So it's a really great opportunity for us to help do that. And I think the places like this, what we're doing right now, is a great way to kind of start that and to connect people, because we don't want anyone to feel like they're on an island. And it's interesting, through these 7 collaboratives, all the projects that we keep seeing come up. So it's really fun to be able to put together meetings, Zoom meetings with experts. We were able to do that for bike parks. We brought together, I think, 8 people who are working on bike parks or have already done a bike park in their community, because we had one collaborative who was thinking about doing it, who was really overwhelmed. So we're able to put all those people together in the same room and let them ask questions. And I think we've seen a lot of value in that.
Great. What about you, Linda? How has your work changed?
Yeah, I think over the years, one of the things that is a guiding principle for us is it's all about the right use in the right location at the right time. And so one of the things is yes, we are a multiple use agency. We provide a wide spectrum of experiences and activities on the landscape. Wildlife and water are incredibly important to us. And so balancing the recreation uses with those needs of water and wildlife is super important. But in doing that, that right use in the right location at the right time that doesn't mean that every use occurs on every acre. And so we've had lots and lots of discussions around how can we help build a broader perspective. There's going to be opportunity somewhere on this landscape. It just may not be on this acre. And so where can we create those opportunities? And so I'll give a couple of examples is we heard a lot from working with backcountry horsemen that they were feeling like they had been pushed out of some of the trail systems because it was just overwhelmed with the amount of mountain bikers in an area and things. And so worked with them. And one of the things that we learned from working with our local chapter was that it's actually more the front country horsemen. They were more looking for day trips, not really packing into the backcountry as much. And a lot of folks have difficulty turning around a big trailer and things. And so a big trailhead was really important and things. And so we looked at where could we provide a bigger trailhead that provided access to a trail system. And that wasn't right next to Jackson and things. And so we created that trailhead somewhere else. So a really important thing is there's got to be alternatives. If it's not here, then where? And things. And so we've had a lot of those conversations, and we've done more broad scale assessments and planning to try to figure out what's the big picture. And outdoor recreation is fundamentally regional in scope. You can't just look at what's happening in your one little tiny area. People are mobile, and so they're going all over the place. So we've tried to work with groups and try to get that bigger perspective of if not here, where, and then also really trying to build. Trying to get out of the specific kind of tribe thinking to look at it's about we, not me. And could have all kinds of conversations around that.
So to follow up on that a little bit, how do you help communicate about some of the, as a land manager, how do you educate and communicate during an engagement process about what is an appropriate use of the land on, like you were saying, on this acre versus that acre, and explain, sometimes the nuances of wildlife biology versus, people's desire to see wildlife or be out on a mountain bike trail or go on a horseback trip. And I last night when we were thinking about this, I was thinking about community experience, that user experience versus that land manager expertise. And sometimes you get those two groups in the room, and it's really tricky to have a collaborative conversation.
The reality is change is hard, and it just takes time and things. But I think that one of the things that we've done is we've rather than force the issue, is take a step back and really listen, and then try to provide some learning opportunities. So the example that mentioned is that there was a huge push for creating a new trail connection. And it's called the Skyline Trail. It's right outside of Jackson. It goes along a ridge, beautiful, this and things. It created a pretty big controversy in our community between kind of the mountain bike and the folks that were really interested in wildlife, saying it's going to disrupt wildlife habitat and everything. So we took a pause. Said we are not going to let this issue divide the community. It is in our larger interest to try to bring the recreation and conservation community together. And so we took a pause, and working with, at that time, Friends of Pathways, we did a big, huge trail charrette and produced a trail assessment, because one of the things we heard from the community, what is the master plan? Are you just going to keep building trails everywhere? And so we took that pause, spent 2 years doing a trail assessment and coming up with kind of what was the emphasis across the broader landscape. And that is, it tiers from our forest plan. Our forest plan is a zoning document that looks at what the emphasis is in different areas. So this assessment kind of tiered from that. But again, not every acre provides the same kind of experience. So we did that, and then worked with folks in different kind of public forums to provide that learning opportunity. Working next with that, you just don't know what's going to spawn from one thing. Is I never knew that this would blossom into what it did, but out of that, we started really investigating, okay, what is the issue with wildlife and recreation? What fundamentally is the problem? And so we decided to invest in more research, and we were really fortunate to connect with Abby Cisneros Kidd, who was at the University of Wyoming at the time, and we're able to support a graduate student who just defended her thesis last Friday, and we're so proud of her. And working with Friends of the Bridger Teton, we hosted a large public forum, which we call the Recreation Wildlife Coexistence Forum. We brought together probably 20 different nonprofits that were working on this particular topic. And Courtney Larson, who you heard from yesterday, was one of our keynote speakers as part of that. But we provided an opportunity for the community to learn from an education standpoint, as well as what the science was saying. And that really helped and has spawned a whole suite of projects that, again, Courtney is really involved with, which we call their Neighbors to Nature study of the area that's right outside of Jackson, where we have 40 wildlife cameras and a whole series of trail counters, and learning how wildlife are moving through that area, which is a really popular recreation area. And so we're excited to see what that teaches us. It's not a sacrifice zone. There are still critters there, even though it's super popular. But what is that always going to be the case in the future? So how can we adapt over time? It's never done. It's always adaptive.
Great, thank you. Sarah, what about you for the shift in the last couple of years?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not necessarily thinking so much about the shift, but the approach that our community took from the very beginning with Pilot Hill. And I look out in the audience and see Steve Smutko, who was engaged really early on with just a whole series of meetings that were set up in town that weren't necessarily collaborative in nature in terms of saying, draw on a map and tell us what you want, et cetera, but they were really keeping the community informed about the steps that we were taking and the thought processes we had around how in the first place do we secure this land and what might that look like. We also spent thousands of hours. Tony Hoke, who's not here today, but gave presentations to every club and organization and scout troop and Rotary group and girls book clubs and anything that he could possibly find in the community to just let them know this is happening. This is that the community has this opportunity. with Pilot Hill, and we're asking the community to be involved in helping us think through what is it that we want to do when we secure this land. We also did a broad survey that stayed open for over a year in the community because people learned about the project at different points in time. They could still give us feedback about what is my greatest concern. Is it wildlife protection? Is it aquifer protection? Is it more recreational access? Is it I'm worried about people camping in my backyard? We did home meetings where we would go into neighborhoods because a good portion of our land literally is people's backyards here in Laramie. And we had those Sherman Hill community neighbors who all had trust with each other come together in a really intimate setting and listen to their concerns and their wants and needs. So that, and then of course we had all these other neighbors that are our partners, the Game and Fish, the Forest Service, the BLM, the city and county, the parks departments together in meetings to really talk about what are their unique needs and desires for this property. So we laid a really strong foundation before we brought in the SE group to help us with the land use plan. And we're able to work with the community in a way that we were able to state up front. There are some restrictions. There are some things we just can't negotiate. And one of them is motorized recreation on the property. That was part of the purchase agreement that, you know, we know that there are desires to have motorized in it, but it helped us up front be really clear with what we couldn't negotiate. And I think because of that, we were able to create some trust in the community that helped us create a land use plan that really is a solid working document that is moving us forward.
Yeah, I remember from that process, the beginning of that project, that you know, there was such strong support from the community from day one. And, you know, they thought, you know, I can't remember who it was that said, we're going to build such an amazing trail system. You know, all the greenbacks from Colorado are going to drive right up to Laramie and come and use it. And they're almost worried before it even started that from this kind of over tourism, you know, we're going to have so many mountain bikers coming up here. We're not even know what to do with all of them. You know, and I'm like, wow, that's some good optimism there. I like it. And so, you know, one thing I thought would be worth mentioning is that during our public engagement process, we used some really interesting visual tools to help people understand what different designs of different trail systems would look like on the landscape. And so we took, you know, we used a trail density formula of, you know, how many acres of, or how many miles of trail per acre. And we looked at comparable projects like the schoolyard is like a stacked loop, really dense trail system. So you see all the bikers in that network all at the same time. You know, there's no trees to separate, the trails are really close together versus, you know, maybe a more forested landscape where the trails are spread apart, you maybe only come across a couple bikers. So we created these really interesting visuals where we drew on photographs to kind of see what it would look like for a horseback rider to move on this type of trail with this type of background. And it really helped people visualize what trails could look like in the area. And then they were able to give better feedback on what they wanted from looking at those pictures of trails really close together, uphill directional trails, downhill directional trails, places they know. How is this comparable to Kurt Gowdy State Park? How is this comparable to the trails in the Happy Jack system? And using what you know, and then you're using these tools to say, okay, this is what I want based on this visual tool that helps me see what is possible here. And I just think that was a really powerful way to engage with that group and help us move forward with the planning process. But I'm going to ask, I think Lauren hasn't answered that second question. You want a
quick comment on your thing? I have to admit, Laramie is still afraid of all the greenies coming down and taking over. And it's one of the things that comes up in almost every conversation I'm in still is, how are we going to manage the crowds? And do we really want to let other people in the world know that Pilot Hill exists? So we're being thoughtful about how we're rolling this out. And I'm on the tourism board, but we're not marketing it much at this point because we just don't feel like we quite have the infrastructure in place yet to really do the job we want to do, which is make sure that as we build out the infrastructure, have the trails, they're serving the purpose that our goal is, which is both to have a really great user experience and also to have the trails protect the land. the trails aren't necessarily for the people. They're to protect the land and make sure that we're stewarding people into the portions of the property where we want them to recreate.
I'll make one just quick comment. As part of that trail assessment, we defined 10 tasks that are associated with trail management. And, you know, people think of, oh, it's just clearing trails. Well, there's a lot more involved in that and things. And so we defined these 10 different tasks. And then as part of the assessment for the different geographic areas, is we asked people to prioritize which of those 10 tasks were most important in this area. And we use that through a design charrette kind of a process. But for some of the areas, use management came out as the highest priority. And so we are not building trails in a number of those areas. The infrastructure is there. It's all about use management now and fixing trailheads. So our trailheads now need the attention. So, and we've communicated that with all, you know, working with our nonprofits and things. It's about connecting neighborhoods to the trail system, and then working on the trailhead and the use management piece. And we'll get into that more later, I'm sure.
Great, Lauren.
Yeah, the Rock Springs area is somewhere that is actually looking forward to having these management problems. We are typically, like many places in Wyoming, an economy based on the extraction industries. And people are just starting to realize the recreational resources that we have right in our surrounding area and jumping on that and coming to us at the BLM, proposing ideas at speeds that we haven't seen in our office before. So I'm very excited to be on the forefront of that.
Great. A bunch of questions just came in. Before we get to the next question on my list, I thought it'd be good to take one of these questions. So feel free to keep on typing the questions in so we can weave the questions into the discussion. So a question from Steve is, what are your critical data needs that, if met, can improve your community engagement processes? And I might take a crack at that one first, and then I'll let anyone else, if anyone else wants to answer that. One thing I see is that there's never enough data about use and types of use to really inform the user conflict conversation. A lot of the user conflict conversation ends up being very qualitative and anecdotal, and really understanding the data about trail use. It's expensive to do intercept surveys. It's expensive to have a lot of trail counters out there, but the more data in that regards always helps create more nuanced recommendations, inform the community engagement process. So that's one data need that I'm always looking for. What about other folks on the panel?
Our office just recently partnered with the university, so thank you, Dan, on the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Report. I think there's some copies out in the hallway, but this is going to be a really good tool for our collaboratives. You know, a lot of the people who are looking to start projects are looking for funding, and so I think having that data that was in that publication is going to be key to helping them with their applications for grants and for funding in the future.
I'll just mention one thing is that we do have a lot of trail counters. And so we've got pretty good data on our front country trail system. We're working on getting better data for dispersed camping through our ambassador program. And so that's been really revealing. We've set up traffic counters and things like that. It's been really hard to get data for at a landscape level, our backcountry thing. We're doing some work right now with the Rocky Mountain Research Station using cell phone data. And it's going to be really interesting to see. It's big data sources. And there's some really innovative stuff that's happening with the use of that. So we're excited to be exploring that this summer. And I think that it's really hard to do social surveys on the federal lands. And so we're fortunate right now, we're just we're doing an independent survey through University of Wyoming through WYSAC, and doing a social survey that's going to support the Bridger Teton Forest Plan. But I think that we're also working with the Outdoor Alliance on some surveys so that those can be done independent, and not so much looking at, there's lots of surveys of we'd like a trail here, we'd like a trail there. What we're more interested in is what are the experiences that people are looking for, and what are the attributes of a system that are important to people. And then we can figure out where's the most appropriate place for that.
Yeah. Any other comments on the data question?
Yeah, data collection on visitor use is really important for receiving funding. But for the BLM, that's data that's really hard to collect. A lot of our recreation happens dispersed, not at formal recreation sites with some key access points, but really it's a lot of 2 tracks leading people out to their favorite hunt areas and fishing holes. So we're working on improving our visitor data collection methods, choosing those key access points for traffic counters, having visitor use cameras at certain points. We're talking about cell tower data collection as well, but most of our field office, you don't have cell service either. So it's something that's an ongoing struggle for us, but we're working on improving our data collection.
Go ahead.
Yeah, excuse me. I think the 2 points for us that are the most challenging to find is resident sentiment. And also the visitor sentiment on the other side of that, and also social sentiment. What are people saying online, talking about their experience when they're coming to mountain bike or climb or being in the outdoors? And for us, being in the focus on management now, is we want to make sure that our community members are also feeling good about how outdoor recreation is expanding, because it is directly tied into the hospitality industry for us, which is Wyoming's second largest industry. So you all have a lot of power with the state now as well too. People are coming to Wyoming to experience everything that we all are doing in this room. So making sure we can stay connected. And then on the other side of that, once we have the data, how do we get it out? There's so much data that we can collect. We need to figure out a way to put it into some sort of nice package that people will truly understand, and not just get paralysis by analysis by 90 pages of data that gets dispersed to a community. So that was really, I would say, our challenges.
So I love this next question. Do you think recreationists need to sometimes adjust their expectations about when and where they will be able to find solitude in the outdoors? And it makes me think of a project I did a couple years ago where we did a capacity analysis on the Summit County, Colorado rec path system. So it's a paved system of 34 miles of pathways, really popular. And we did a bunch of surveys where we were, seeing how many people were out on different segments of trail, asking them about their experiences, whether their perception of crowding, and doing it on a weekday where it was primarily local residents, and doing it on a weekend where it was primarily tourists. It was like we were on different planets, folks from Denver. Oh, this is so great. It's it's not crowded. So, and then, every local on the Saturday, like, I don't go there on Saturdays. And so I think, folks from Wyoming who are used to a little bit more solitude, a little bit more space in your recreation, it feels very different than going to like a suburban Denver State Park where everyone there is happy, but you think it's like you think it's the Mall of America. So, I think this is a really interesting question of our perceptions of solitude and the qualities we're looking for in our different outdoor experiences. And I'd really like to hear what our panel has to say about that.
I've worked with my background is in wilderness. And so the concept of solitude is ingrained in us. And one thing that I would say is when people talk about solitude, it is not necessarily about being alone. Is the concept of solitude is really about feeling like you have some ability to be free from the obligations of daily life, and you're not inundated with phone calls and everything, and a sense of timelessness where your time is your own, and things. And so one of the things that I think that we found is that for a lot of people, because I've heard snowmobilers that we've been working with say that they don't use the word solitude, but they're looking for serenity. And that's the word that they use, but they're talking about the same concept. And so it really is about what we hear from a number of people is they're looking for an opportunity for quiet. There's so much noise in our towns and our communities and things that just being able to escape and have some sense of quiet and hear natural sounds is incredibly important. And so that's one of the things that we certainly heard through the destination management plan and from residents that are in the communities is how do we create these quiet spaces that people can go and things. And so that's something that I think there's a lot of opportunities for that through the wellness parks and things like that, where we could create quiet spaces. And so we're exploring of how do we create that within a trailhead that's right next to town as a little quiet space.
Any other comments on different recreational experiences and solitude?
I actually have a question for you again. How do you balance that with motorized use and quiet?
Yeah. Again, the right use in the right location at the right time is it was interesting working on the motorized recreation. Again, we started that whole thing with just listening sessions of what does a great motorized trail system look like and things. What are those attributes and everything? And then the reality is in Jackson is there's pretty limited opportunity for motorized and things. And based on our forest plan, it was all about wildlife habitat and things. And so where we could create a motorized trail system, we did that, creating loop opportunities and working with Wyoming State Trails has been an unbelievable resource for helping to create really sustainable trail systems. And what we said is that we're not going to be able to provide much miles, but we will bend over backwards to make those quality trail systems. And working with the motorized trail and also a couple of the businesses in town. But it's not perfect, but I would say that right now we're really struggling with the explosion in side-by-side rentals and what that's done in town. And there's a lot of dissatisfaction, but we're working really hard to try to figure out how we manage that and what the alternatives are.
And then when everything's electric, we're going to be having a whole different conversation.
That's coming.
Well, I'm going to move back to one of my questions. And Amy, I'll have you kick this off. It's a fairly broad question. In your experience, what are the promises, pitfalls of groups, called roundtables, collaboratives, or other working advisory groups? And I'd love some, anecdotes and specific examples in your work with these types of groups.
So we have a project that I can talk a little bit about. Caleb Carter, who's in the room here. This is our Northeast Wyoming Outdoor Recreation Collaborative. And they decided that they had a trail right outside of Newcastle that they wanted to widen to be adaptive, to allow a four-wheel mountain bike to be able to be on there and really just improve the quality of the trail. And so this was coming not only from one person, a single person, but this is coming from a club, a mountain bike club. And so a lot of the work was done at the club level, and then they would come to the collaborative that's got about 20 people on it and ask when they had questions. And so we were able to kind of help fill in those gaps that they needed to get that project done. And actually the exciting part of that is that project is now done. They're going to be doing a grand opening on May 20th. So it's kind of fun to be able to highlight that. But I think that's a really good example of a really enthusiastic, passionate group of people in the community that live there, that work there, and really wanted to make something that they already had better. We're not out there to come and develop everything. And it kind of goes to that solitude piece as well. We're there to help, to listen to the community, number one, and then help fill in the gaps and connect them with the opportunities and the resources that they need to get projects done.
What about on the flip side? What are some, pitfalls or stumbles along the way with the groups that you work with?
I think personally, one of the challenges that I see is I don't live in the communities that I work in, except one. So that, there's an important piece of trust building that has to happen and relationship building and one-on-one conversations that is critical to what we do. Because like someone said yesterday, you walk in and you say, I'm with the government, I'm here to help. And you're going to get laughed out of the room. But I am with the government and I am here to I'm telling you that. So it's been a learning experience for sure. And like she said, it's not perfect. We're learning a lot, but I feel like we're getting there. And as we start to see some of these projects, these trail systems open and these boat ramps open, and it's just really exciting time for our office.
How do you, in your experience, how do people get involved in the collaboratives, or how do you make sure that there's good representation from the community in your work?
I think it never stops, and inviting people. So when we start one of these collaboratives, kind of the first thing we do is we put together a list. We get with our partnering land managed agencies and we say, who do we need to have at this giant table that we're trying to build? We really want to have all the outdoor recreation interests represented. So we always invite someone from motorized. We always invite someone from equestrian. We really try to get a table full of people that have different things to add and contribute. So that's pretty key. Some people don't stay. The process is long, especially on federal land, as we all know. And so some people drop off. We have new people come. We have a new emergence of students and young people that are really trying to get involved, which is great. Really exciting to see that. So it never stops, inviting new people and getting more people involved.
Great. Sarah, do you want to talk about the collaboratives and working groups and advisory groups and all the different groups involved in Pilot Hill?
Yeah, I always find this a fascinating question because, we all only see the world through the map of the reality that we've experienced. So my map is obviously very different than someone else's, just because of the position that we come from and what we really are passionate about. I think one of the most interesting challenges with any collaborative process is kind of figuring out how you manage expectations and how you also allow the group to go through the challenging process of figuring out how do I shift and look at this question or this issue or this potentially cool opportunity that we have from everybody else's perspective and not just my own. So for me, that's kind of, at least in the role that I play with Pilot Hill, kind of my responsibility at different times. I find myself in different groups where people are saying, my focus is that we really need to get more people on these trails and do it as soon as possible. And other people's focus of saying, I really don't want to see anybody from anywhere else on my trails because they're my trails in my backyard, and shifting that focus. The quietest group we found, at least my thinking is in Laramie, were the people that were most frightened about Pilot Hill. The horse rider group also was a hard group to crack. And I think the learning for me was that they were still having the conversations that we wanted them to have with us, but they were just doing it amongst themselves. So not assuming that our efforts at the collaboratives and getting people together really was the whole story, but trying to find ways to crack those other conversations and hear what it is that other groups are having, not with us, but about us, I guess is the way I would say it. So that I think is kind of the biggest thing. I keep thinking about how we as an organization don't get so bogged down in the day-to-day process of what we're trying to do, which is overwhelming, and continue to keep trying to find ways to be in the community and hearing those conversations as this project unfolds.
I'll just offer one other little thing that I think has been effective is we've had a lot of one-on-one conversations before we ever bring people together. And that's been really useful can think if we're doing that right now. There's a lot of push for having e-bikes on most of our non-motorized trails. And that's an incredibly contentious issue and things. And so we've just engaged in a ton of one-on-one conversations and then brought the group together. And that's been much more productive. And again, managing expectations. It's like the decision space is this big. And some of these other things are just non-starters. So we either get something done in the short term or we fight about this for in the next 2 years. And things. So
you didn't think that your job was going to be partially to be a therapist, did you? Sometimes I'm like, what line of work am I in? Am I like letting people just really vent for an hour and then we're going to actually get to the work? Any other comments on that question about collaboratives? And Lauren,
Yeah, I'll hop in. We talk a lot about passion. Our jobs are something that affect everyone in our communities, and people feel very passionate about their recreational access. And that leads people to not practice empathy so much when considering other people's point of view on an issue. An example that we've been working on in our field office is we're working on a mountain bike trail expansion. Outside of the city of Green River. We have some of the best mountain bike trails in the state, and we're working on adding over 20 more miles of trail to that. And the mountain bikers are super excited about it, but we've seen some pushback from our motorized community, specifically our motorcycles. And it's just reminding that, through proper planning and proper management, we do have the space to provide access to all these different users. So sitting down with our motorized groups, I said, okay, you might be losing access to these spaces here, but going back to outcome-focused management, we can talk about the ways that you might not be out on that trail, but that trail is still going to benefit you and your community in these ways. And we can create space for you to have your activity. So now I'm sitting down with these motorized groups, mapping out the places that are important for them to have access to. So we're making sure that we're creating that for everyone.
Yeah, I like that links back to some of Birch's opening remarks. And I call that growing the pie, not dividing the pie, that creating value. How can we grow the pie together?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a question from the Q&A. This is an interesting question. How have you engaged with tribal partners in finding a balance between creating sustainable recreation opportunities while protecting cultural sites? Does anyone have experience with that?
Yeah, I can go first.
Okay.
With the Bureau of Land Management, pretty much everything we do, every action we put on the ground requires tribal consultation. So I work a lot with our cultural folks, our archaeologists, to engage in these conversations. We had a great workshop yesterday here talking about putting place meanings to the places that you're proposing these actions in, engaging with your communities to find out what these mean to different people. And that's a lot of what our archaeologists do with the tribes, is assign these place meanings. And that's something that I'm trying to do with, everyday people, find out what these place meanings are. We're working on a project right now to create more interpretive signage in some significant cultural sites in our field office that get really high visitation, but there's no on-demand interpretation there for the visitors. You kind of have to go out with someone who already knows about the site to learn what's there. So we are consulting with the relevant tribes to have them help us create that interpretation. So we're not doing it for them. We're not telling their stories for them. And we're, educating people who are going out there.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting thought, because I think it's not only your archaeologists, but it's kind of doing your homework before you even start the conversations. It's gathering that data, having the archaeology inventory completed. It's reaching out to resources like WIN that can tell you what endangered species are on the property. It's having the botanist and the biologist and every other ologist on the property, really educating you as to what you need to know about the land before you start the broader conversations, possibly with the community. So I just think that piece of the collaboration from the very beginning and really knowing that you need to think about what all the different aspects of your homework might be is important in this process.
I'll just add that this is an area where we have a tremendous amount to learn. And there's a lot of humility that needs to occur first is working with the tribes. These are their ancestral homelands. And I think that we've got a long ways to go. Is outdoor recreation is going to run headlong into some tribal interests and things. And we're going to have to work through that and things. And so we're hearing about that already in a couple of places. And it's just a place that I don't feel like I know as much, but it's something that we're going to be learning a lot about as we are developing. We're starting to really work on developing those relationships.
Great. I'm going to pick one of my questions, and selfishly, because this is what I do for work, I wanted to ask about what is the role of master planning in the work that you do, or how do the plans that are the outdoor recreation plans, the community plans, how do you use them, and how do they inform your work?
I'll start with that one just because it's been such a critical component of our success. If we didn't have the master land use plan, we would not have secured the state land exchange for a portion of the private property. We would not have finalized the agreements with the University of Wyoming for the land that they own on the property, the BLM, the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission approving creating a WHMA right adjacent to a city, a really new model for them, and doing it in a way where they're not holding the leases, Pilot Hill is, but we have this unique partnership with them. That land use plan, mine is in my bag and it's so beat up. It's a really critical tool for us in really the success that we've had with Pilot Hill, and in being able to, which really is my role, fundraising and community engagement, go to supporters and say, this is what we're doing. This is the vision that the community came up with. Can you help us with the project? It's the foundation for all the grants that I write. It's the foundation for the private donations that we've sought. And it's a tool that we turn back to in every conversation that we have on Pilot Hill. So I encourage you to do that. The other really strong tool that's been helpful to us is an economic development analysis. Sometimes I read it and I think, this is kind of pie in the sky. Where'd they come up with this? But I'm not an economist, but it helps me be able to go to entities and really say to them, this is really what we think this is going to do for our community and for our county and the economy, and have a baseline, at least for us then, to start to measure those outcomes. So I hated to spend the money at the time for both of these, although I loved working with Gabby. But I encourage you to really recognize that those investments are going to be critical to the success of your projects.
Yeah, so there was a follow-up from the Q&A from the audience about what were the general expenses of developing the land use plan and what resources were utilized to cover the expenses. And to tee that off, I don't usually work with nonprofit groups. I would say most of the clients are either, municipalities or counties, or occasionally, a private foundation that's funding a project. So it was really interesting to say, oh, this nonprofit has the money to do a land use plan? Like, how did that happen? And so, one, you have the best development director, marketer of all time over there, but you really have to sell the value. And so I know that a lot of people in the room today might be, working for nonprofits or smaller organizations, trying to do the same thing, selling the value of a master plan, trying to raise money and selling the value of the master plan so that you can then raise the money to do the planning exercise. So I wonder if you have any other follow-ups on that.
I'll be quite honest with you. In a land management meeting, Dan McCoy said, oh, we really need a master plan. And it's going to cost $70,000. And I looked at him like, yeah, whatever. But I can't tell you how grateful I am for the fact that he stood up and said, this is important and we need to do it. And all of the rest of the managers of all these different agencies in the room agreed. They knew that they needed these tools in order for us to move forward. So as far as the fundraising piece of it goes, we really did some targeted asks to some specific corporations in town that understood the value of planning. Engineering firms are great for that. They're really into planning. So think about what message it is you're trying to deliver to your funders and target your asks specifically to what their mission is and what their values are, and you'll be successful. The other key piece was that we were able to find a funder early on that understood that we needed funding just for the administration of all this work. And the university was a huge supporting partner with that. We had another couple of firms in town that understood that, and a private foundation that understood that if they could help us with that significant funding for the first couple of years, just to be able to pay somebody to keep the work moving forward, that it would be tremendous to us. The other thing I will caution all of you is that funders want to fledge you. You're not going to be in their nest forever, and you need to really be upfront and acknowledge that with them. In the beginning, we ask for 1 to 3 years generally of their partnership, but we really are clear to them that we don't expect them to carry us forever.
Erik, what about in your work? What's the role of master planning?
We were pretty fortunate. The destination had wanted to come up with a sustainable destination management plan for several years. And we were fortunate to be able to use lodging tax once the interpretation of how we could spend the money. So you do have some precedents if you want to talk to your lodging tax boards, or your chambers, or your DMOs. We were able to get approved to use those funds to create a plan because of the impact that it has on the destination and the economy for your different counties. So that helped with us. But what I would say on the funding side is don't be afraid to ask for money. People don't sit around and say, how are we going to give all this money away? It's opportunistic. Get out there, get on the streets, let them know what the potential impact would be. Because once we put the sustainable destination management plan, the reason why the county and the town was on board with it to us is it filled a lot of holes and gaps where our traditional master plan was in place. They were like, all right, this is great. We've seen changes over the last 5 years that the master plan's in place. And this allows us to fill in those holes, kind of change the direction that we're headed, which will allow them to potentially allocate funds from the community, the county, and the town's budget to support some of these initiatives. Without the master plan in place, they wouldn't know that the community wants to even go in that direction or to even consider some of these funds. And secondary with that, we were able to support, as you mentioned, administrative costs. It is a full-time job to really effectively, in my opinion, to effectively move a master plan forward. We've all put plans together, and unfortunately, a lot of times they get put in a book, put on a shelf, and occasionally get referenced to when someone wants to either challenge something or get on board with it. But if you have someone that we established a destination stewardship council, and we have allocated a full-time staff member to help push the ideals that came out of the plan forward, our 8 pillars, to ensure we're getting the right organizations together, whether that's federal, national, town, county, nonprofits, community, whatever that is. What we've found is having someone just getting these entities together and helping push things forward and actually helping them write grant requests and find donations to support the initiatives that the county and or the lodging tax board can't, in our case, has been very helpful and has really helped with fundraising down the line.
Does the sustainable destination master plan have prioritized action items that you are constantly working from?
It does. This is all brand new. So we launched the plan in January and we established the Destination Stewardship Council. I think our first meeting might have been March. So we started with a core group of individuals that got together to target some key takeaways that we felt we could initially get some wins from, and then also speak with that council to increase the size of the group and get more people involved in that. So, for us, we wanted to get a few, for lack of a better word, wins to get out into the community and say, this is what we're going to start doing so we can start gaining some traction. But we have 8 priorities, and we know that, for instance, housing is one of them. Personally, our organization can't assist with housing, but there's 15 different organizations within Jackson that can. and we can connect them with statewide and federal to move forward. So we've targeted a few right off the bat. They will change as we see the conditions within the town and the county change, so we can pivot on kind of what those focuses are.
Does anyone else want to chime in about master planning and how it informs your work? Amy, Lauren?
Really what I do is more facilitation,
Okay.
But I would always advocate to get professionals involved. And to have a document that you can always point to, I think is valuable, is huge, critical.
Linda, do you want to chime in on the forest plan
Yeah.
that you're working on?
So I just, after 32 years, I just switched jobs, and so my new position is the engagement specialist for the forest plan revision. And so it's a whole, I've always worked in Teton County, and now I'm going to be working with across the state, and the Bridger Teton is a gem in our opinion. It's an incredible landscape, and our forest plan is 32 years old, and there's been a lot of change. Big game migration corridors was really not talked about. Climate change wasn't talked about. How the technology changes that have influenced the different kinds of activities. Winter recreation has exploded in that time. And so we feel really fortunate. It is time to set a new vision, and I don't see that our fundamental values of a lot of what the Bridger Teton is around its history and context. We're known as the WWW forest. Our focus is wildlife, water, and wild lands. We're not a super developed forest and things, but within that, there is huge opportunities for change and setting some new direction. And so it's going to be really fun to work over the next few years to shape that future for that. And that forest plan really does set the direction for that land for the next, it's supposed to be 10 to 15 years, but again, it's been 30 years. So we're looking forward to really trying to reach out and engage. Meeting with many of the state agencies on Tuesday next week.
I think, and also a master plan can sometimes be a guidebook for a recreation manager. I had the experience last year where we had a client, a county recreation manager quit in the middle of the project. And so we kind of had to hobble through the rest of the project without a client. And now there's a new manager. And so, here's your job. This is your plan. This is all the work that's been done. And I think it's been really helpful for that new manager to say, oh, okay, this is, all the work that's been done. These are my priorities. This is my job. And I think we've been in an environment with a lot of turnover, especially a lot of the Forest Service folks I've been working with. They're moving districts, they're moving positions. And having really good plans can help create that continuity among the shifting personnel. So that's been a new added bonus of a master plan that I've really been thinking about the last couple of years that I didn't even know about. So I'm going to do a final question and then go back to the Q&A. And this is pretty open-ended, so you can focus on whatever you want, but how do you measure success in the work that you do? And Linda, I know this is yours is your favorite question, so I'll let you start.
This is a saying that I've heard from a lot of Forest Service people and probably in other agencies, is that, we measure success if we didn't get appealed. Or we measure success if we made everybody equally unhappy. And I don't buy that for 2 seconds. And things that is no measure of success. Is the things that we've always talked about internally is really a couple of metrics, and they're not quantitative. And so they can't necessarily be measured really distinctly, but did we create a foundation for improvement? Did we move the needle forward? Did we create an environment where people are excited to implement whatever came out of that, out of the plan and things? And then did we build some credibility and trust along the way and keep building on that? So those are the things that, for a decision, can we adequately explain the rationale for the decisions that we made? Those are the kinds of metrics that we use, but we really focus on, did we build some social capital in this process? And over time, that I really think that has allowed us to do some things in the community that maybe we couldn't have before. So I don't know, those are our metrics of success, and we do talk about them after every decision.
Amy, what about you?
I would say personally, the biggest measure of success that we have is after we've been in a community and had a large meeting, sometimes contentious, sometimes we don't like what they have to say, turns out. I think the best, the most successful thing we can have is if we're driving home and they call us and they say, this thing that happened in the meeting, let's talk about that. Or, hey, you mentioned that you can help with this. I'd love to have that connection. It's really using us as a resource. I think that is success, as well as seeing projects on the ground. I mean, we're about to have a big one here in May that opens up, and that, of course, makes us really happy too as recreators.
Erik, what about for you?
Well, we really have 3 targets for success for us. It's the economy, the community, and our natural environment. Economy is the easy one. There is an amazing amount of data that you can find on hotel occupancies, tax collections, et cetera, et cetera. So, ensuring that Teton County has a vibrant year-round economy for us is very important. That one's easy. As far as the community goes, we look at that with our resident sentiment surveys. We will continue to be engaged with our residents. We will continue to invite them into focus groups and do online polls and different ways to stay engaged with them. Because realistically, for us, there's a perception that tourism is taking away from the enjoyment of them living in Teton County, even though arguably every job in Teton County is somewhat directly related to the robust tourist economy that's there. So we want to make them feel that they're seeing a benefit from it. Why do we have the Center for the Arts? Why do we have the nice restaurants and all the outdoor activities? Because they are supported by the tourism industry coming in. So that one will stay in touch. The natural our natural resources, we lean on all of our partners. Teton County, which a lot of people don't know, actually goes all the way up to Yellowstone, or to Old Faithful and Yellowstone. That's all still Teton County. So having so much national land, federal land, state land, we're going to lean on our partners and how we can support them to ensure that is protected. It's a hard, tangible item to put on there. But we can get some data about people behaving better on the trails and not impacting, interfering with wildlife and items like that. But those are really the 3 tiers. And as I mentioned, we're going to work with the University of Wyoming, try to be able to collect all that data and put it in a way that someone can go onto a dashboard or go onto a site and see how our efforts are impacting their daily life, the economy, and also protecting our natural resources around Teton County.
Sarah, what about you?
Boy, I'm so impressed with all these really tangible ways. I'm intimidated here to answer this question. Pilot Hill is kind of a unique community planning effort that really the primary goal behind it was to enhance our livability here in our community. We wanted to protect our water resource and make sure that we weren't spending a lot of money having to treat our freshwater drinking water. And we wanted to protect the wildlife that on this lovely landscape that we all just treasure here in Laramie. It's our Grand Tetons, but on a different version, We wanted to make sure that our school children could get out of school at 3:30 and jump on their bike and have a place to go play in the wild. And that our senior citizens would have a place to hike year round, even in the wind in Laramie. and not have a barrier of not having transportation to get there. So for me, when I drive down Gray's Gable past the middle school and see a group of kids riding their bikes toward Pilot Hill, I count that as success. When I am out on the property and run into people that say, oh, I really love this new trail, I count that as success. And when we still have people in the community that are passionate enough about the project and about the work that we're doing, that they'll come to us with new ideas, that they'll cry when they hear that we're opening a new trail, that they'll say, I'm okay with all the greenies because they're also eating in our restaurants and then going home, then those are kind of the measures of success that we have. I know that's not very formal, but it touches on the mission of our project, which was economic enhancement for the community, better livability and recreational access and health and mental health, protecting our water and protecting our wildlife.
I'll give one more example because we use this metrics of success at many different levels. So I've talked previously about, what we talk about, with a plan or a decision. We also use that every summer with our field crews, and particularly Scott is going to be talking about the ambassadors for responsible recreation. But we talk when we're working with our ambassadors and things, is that we only have 3 metrics here of what's going to be successful. Is did we have no escaped campfires that burned down the forest? Number 1. Number 2 is we do not want a habituated bear that has to be removed or injures a person. Number 2. Third metric is we want you all at the end of the season to feel like you want to return and things. And at the end of the season, we check in and say, did we meet those 3 objectives and things? And if the answer is yes, let's celebrate. So very tangible. And everybody's like, doesn't matter anything else, but let's just focus on those 3 metrics and things. And that seems to
I love that. Lauren, what about you?
Yeah, like most other people in the panel were saying, our measures of success during the community engagement process are pretty qualitative. It's about building credibility with our community, giving people a space that they feel that their input matters and that they trust us to have these impacts in their communities. Once a project hits the ground, we can get a little more quantitative. If we're getting the visitor use we expected to see at this site, if we're seeing a reduction in user conflicts, then that means that we did our job. We created something that the community really needed and is benefiting from. And after that point, it can still be qualitative, having these conversations with people. Did they enjoy what we created? Just getting out and enjoying our public lands.
I think we have time for one question, but my metric of success is I never want to work on a project where the plan sits on the shelf. So if I come back and I see a client again, I want that plan to be dog-eared, underlined, photocopied to death. I want people to be out there using the plans that they've created in a meaningful way. So I probably only have time for one question, but I thought this one was pretty interesting about engaging private landowners bordering or inside public lands. We have such a patchwork of private and public land. And how do you use that as part of the planning and education process? And just an anecdote is I spent most of last year in northern New England, where a lot of the recreation takes place on private lands through handshake agreements, conservation easements. And with the explosion of recreation in COVID, a lot of that fell apart, where people said, I don't want this many people coming to the mountain bike trail in the back of my farm, or I don't want this many people coming to my fishing stream next to my house. And so I just think it's really different in the West, but I'd be really curious about your experiences in including private landowners.
For the Rock Springs BLM field office, this is a big issue for us because we're right in the checkerboard for 20 miles north and south of Highway 80, which runs through the middle of our field office. Every other square mile is private land. So that's something that's really difficult for us to navigate, especially when most of the development that we're trying to bring to our communities, we want near the communities so people have to stop in our towns when they're recreating. But something that's been hugely helpful in that has actually been the recreation collaboratives with the county. They've been bringing different landowners to the table as well. In Rock Springs, it's a lot of grazing associations, and they can get behind, mostly they're worried about liability, but when we talk about how it's going to diversify our economy, benefit everyone, they can get behind that. And it's just been a great forum to have those conversations.
And I think the first thing that you need to do is invite them, offer them a seat at the table, and really get them involved early and often. You know, we talk about that with public engagement, always early and often. And when you think you've done enough, do it again. And when you think that's enough and you've done too much, keep doing it over and over and over again, and keep that conversation going.
So I think this is time. I didn't get a chance to get to all the questions. So please, if you have some burning questions, please feel free to find me or our esteemed panel members to continue the conversation through today and tomorrow. I just want to thank you all so much for your insight and sharing your experiences.